Hey everyone, it's been a little over a year since I first got to try out the Mate X for the first time. It was an incredibly futuristic prototype, but it was also very far away from hitting store shelves. It was fragile, the software was a little rough around the edges, and there was simply more to be done. Now Huawei has released an update called the Mate Xs, and we have our very own unit in for review. So if you can spare the cash, is this worth a buy? And what exactly does it mean for the future of phones? I'm Angie for GSM Arena, and this is our review of the Mate Xs. The Mate Xs is still unlike pretty much every phone you've ever seen. It's super light for the size of its display, and when fully opened, it's incredibly thin. It has the same falcon wing design, and most of the electronics are cased in the bar on the side of the phone, while the two central panels hold the batteries. Thanks to this form factor, it's easy to grip even though the sides of the phone feel slightly more slippery than last year. The back is made of the same high-quality plastic. There's also a super fast fingerprint reader on the side, which is pretty much instant and very reliable. When closed, the phone's dimensions are that of a regular flagship smartphone in 2020. More importantly, you get a full-size smartphone display, unlike the Galaxy Fold's obnoxiously tiny screen. And since we're on the topic of comparing the two, here there's no gap when the Mate is closed, except for the small half circle where the hinge is. The hinge itself has been redesigned. It looks a little more streamlined, but more importantly, it means that there have been a lot of clever and intricate changes in how the XS folds. The hinge is now made of zirconium, which is harder than titanium alloy and should be more durable. Even the button that pops open the display has been changed, and it now has a red line down the middle. In general, the Mate Xs opens more smoothly than the X. It doesn't make weird ratchety sounds, and it feels a lot more natural to fold and unfold. I think that this might be the key thing here. Despite how futuristic this phone is, it's also very easy to get used to. This was true of the original Mate X, but it's even more true now. Now, obviously, the design itself comes with a natural risk. The screen is on the outside, so if you're not keeping it in a protective case, it's easy to get scratched. There's a new aerospace-grade protective layer added on top of the display that supposedly makes the design 80% stronger. But even though that adds extra sturdiness to this layer, it's unlikely to survive scot-free in the hands of a less gentle user. The top layer of the display also looks like it can be peeled off, even though it's an intrinsic part of the design. And that takes us back to some of the Galaxy Fold's issues at launch. On a more nitpicky level, the display feels less pleasant than the original X. It says if fingers don't glide as smoothly, and this thing loves fingerprints and dust. There's no IP protection either, and you can see part of the screen through the little vents in the middle of the phone. While Huawei has made clear and significant improvements to its durability, the XS is still a few generations away from surviving a less cautious user. In this sense, it reminds me of the fragility of the first touchscreen phones, and it's really heartening to think about how we've gone from there to phones like the Armor 7, which can survive a lot of abuse. We're still in the beginning stages of sturdy foldables, and I think that this will be a key to their wider adoption by the public. Aside from durability concerns, the screen is actually great for a foldable. When opened wide, you can see the bend only where the reflections off the screen distort a bit. Otherwise, it lays pretty flat, and there's no distortion whatsoever on the image on the screen. Open, it's a generous 8 inches across, while closed, it's 6.6 on the front and 6.38 inches on the back. Irritatingly, you can only use the back when you're taking a selfie, whereas before the phone would automatically light up whichever side of the screen was up. It's a bit dim for a 2020 flagship, and we got a max reading of 448 nits. It goes a bit lower when you have the entire screen unfolded. As expected from an OLED, you get super deep blacks. Colors were accurate too, with a saturated vivid mode and a more accurate natural mode. There's no HDR10 support though. Now, due to the 4x3 form factor, when opened, most videos won't take advantage of the space, but you still get to enjoy it when using social media or browsing the net. Despite space constraints, the Mate Xs has a hybrid stereo speaker. There is a fully fledged speaker on the bottom left side of the phone. The earpiece doubles as a second channel. They run in stereo only when you hold the phone in landscape orientation. The XS has a total battery capacity of 4,500 mAh to power the large display, and it got an endurance rating of 84 hours when the device was closed and 69 when it was open. While this isn't very impressive in comparison to regular phones, it's actually a very good result, especially when you consider that the battery is powering an unusually large display in a very new form factor. In any case, the charging speeds were fantastic, and we got from 0 to 80% in half an hour and a full charge in 57 minutes. There's no wireless charging here though. The Mate Xs sports the Kirin 990 5G chipset. It seemed to test a little slower than the P40, but there was no significant difference in terms of real-world usage, and you're getting flagship-grade performance. Despite the thermal constraints, the phone remained comfy to hold even under sustained heavy loads. You also get 5G support. The Mate Xs runs Android 10 with EMUI 10.0.1 on top, which is actually missing a few elements from EMUI 10.1, which was introduced on the P40. Now, before I get into all the details, I have to point out that you'll still be missing the Play Store for apps, as well as other Google native apps you might like to use, like Google Maps or YouTube. You can find many of the apps or their alternatives on Huawei's app gallery, but even though it's expanding constantly, certain apps are still noticeably absent. So finding your favorites might involve a bit of back and forth with different third-party app stores or transferring them from your old phone. So overall, getting apps on this phone is going to be a bigger hassle than what you're probably used to. That said, if you don't need the latest games and apps, or if you're a power user that knows their way around an APK file, you're probably going to be fine. For the most part, this UI will feel super familiar to you if you've used a Huawei or Honor device in the past couple of years. There's a lot of customization options, and it's far from a stock Android experience. You'll find a dark mode, a newsfeed, and a disappointing lack of an app drawer. The UI has been improved from last year in terms of foldable usability, but in general, Huawei's approach has been one of simplicity. When you open and close the fold, apps switch from the full 8-inch display to the more common 6.6-inch. Most apps seem to scale quite nicely and simply switch over to their dedicated tablet UI. We did run into a few issues with that functionality, so your mileage will vary depending on the app you have open. The whole system works well in practice, and it adds a certain flow to the user experience. There's now a multi-window mode, which lets you use two apps side by side and have one floating above them. It even lets you drag and drop files from the gallery to an email. You can even use this feature when the phone is folded into its more standard form factor. I have to say though, that this, unlike their unfolding experience, is less intuitive, and some features were difficult to get used to. What is missing here is some more creativeness in taking advantage of the unique form factor. Their keyboard options, for example, are rather limited. I miss having the floating keyboard, which is available on the Galaxy Fold. Also, the side strip remains unused by the UI. There's no animations that span between the front and back of the phone. No matter how you place it, there is always a bit of the screen showing, or a lot, and yet it behaves like a conventional display. Perhaps as foldables become more common and more developers get to use them, they'll think of new ways to take advantage of the new form factor, and Huawei will be inspired in turn. The cameras on the Mate Xs are pretty much the same ones that you'll find on the P30 Pro, albeit with slightly different image processing. There is a 40 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto snapper, a 16 megapixel ultrawide, and a 3D depth sensor. You can shoot either in folded or unfolded mode, but the latter feels unnatural because it harkens back to using a tablet for taking photos. Doable, but awkward. In daylight, shots from the main camera come out at 10 megapixels by default. They have plenty of detail, a wide dynamic range, and slightly more muted colors than some competition. All around, the Mate Xs had more mature processing. Fine geometric patterns here and there come out looking a little different than they do in real life. The only thing you really should note is that the main cam had inconsistent white balance and switched drastically from one photo to another. Low light tended to make it worse. If you turn on the Master AI enhancement, you'll get a wider dynamic range, slightly more saturation, and more sharpness. You can go in and force the camera to output images in a full 40 megapixel resolution, but this offers few real-world benefits. The telephoto camera's natural resolution is 8 megapixels, so it upscales images a little and outputs in the same resolution as the main snapper. 3x zoom is supposed to be optical, and unsurprisingly, images were sharp and detailed, though we saw haze in some areas. Dynamic range is more narrow than the main cams, but colors were comparable between the two. At 5x zoom, we saw some extra softness, though if you don't pixel peep, shots remain perfectly usable. You can take photos at a max of 30 times digital zoom. They're usable if shot with a steady hand or a tripod, but the results never came out perfectly sharp. The phone's 16 megapixel ultrawide camera was good, but nothing really impressive. There's some barrel distortion around the corners, and there was a noticeable softness throughout the frame. Dynamic range was more limited than the main cams, and colors were more muted. You also saw a tiny bit more noise than on the main camera. Some of this softness gets better if you switch on the master AI. In low light, images were once again improved by the AI. There's plenty of detail and good dynamic range, and shadows and highlights are balanced. Color retention is great too. When it comes to night mode, you have to wait upwards of 7 seconds without moving, and though the real-time image stacking is fascinating to watch, it's actually not much better than the regular shots with HDR. Perhaps if it's a very dark scene, then the night mode will actually be of use, but for the most part, just use the AI and you'll be plenty happy with the results. If you decide that you really want to zoom in low light, you won't get amazing results. The shots will be usable for social media, but the aperture simply is too dim for amazing photos. The ultra-wide camera performed pretty similar in the evenings, though it produced slightly better results with more resolved detail. It tended to be more underexposed, and for best results, we had to lock spot exposure. There's no selfie camera here, and if you want to take a selfie, you need to close the Mate and turn the cameras to face you. It's a brilliant solution in terms of saving space, but it does mean you can't have a video chat on the full unfolded display. Considering how important video calls have become in this day and age, that's pretty unfortunate. Selfies were unsurprisingly very good, with plenty of detail and great colors. But here, like before, there were inconsistencies in terms of white balance. Skin tones would skew from pinkish in one shot to yellowish in the next. It is a software bug though, so Huawei will hopefully clear that up with an update. More infuriatingly, Huawei has disabled the ultra-wide in selfie mode. While this is fine for most selfies, this would have been amazing for group selfies. I mean, post-pandemic of course. Selfie portraits and regular portraits are one and the same thanks to the camera's configuration. Results were impressive and you had a wide variety of beauty options available. The phone can shoot a max of 4K at 60 FPS, but there's no 8K here. You also can't disable the EIS. Footage from the main camera was flagship level with plenty of detail, good sharpness, and great dynamic range. Colors were a little more muted than we would have liked though. Ultra-wide videos had slightly less detail than what you'd see from the main cam, and dynamic range was a little more limited too. Other than this, we really liked videos from the ultra-wide, and colors were similar to the footage from the main camera. The telephoto, on the other hand, struggled with videos. It had an issue with focusing and elevating and lowering the ISO at random. Should that be fixed, 3x zoom videos look great. There's plenty of detail and good dynamic range. Huawei has done a great job with this phone, and it's definitely making big strides away from it being just a prototype. Early adopters are going to have a lot of fun with this new form factor. Also, the cameras are powerful, the chipset is speedy, and the screen, well, the screen is the star here. That said, this foldable is far from being perfect, and there are some important things that need to be ironed out. We expect that in future generations, foldables are going to be more durable. But in terms of this particular device, its Achilles heel is actually software. The camera was inconsistent. The app multiplier needs to be launched in a slightly more intuitive way. And sadly, the lack of Google services on this phone really takes away from what the full experience should have been. While early adopters in Western markets with cash to burn are going to have a lot of fun with this foray into the future of foldables, maybe it's a good idea for them to keep their old phones as a backup just in case. With that said, I really love the Mate Xs, and I can't wait to see what else Huawei has in store for us in terms of foldables. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button down below, subscribe, hit the bell icon, more importantly, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time.